And now it's my pleasure to introduce an old friend as our keynote speaker. I first met Steve Collier when the board of directors sent me to a 6-week course on electric cooperative management at the University of Nebraska in 1992 and 1993. Steve was part of the faculty then, and I can tell you without exaggeration that Steve's lecture had the 30 or so CEO candidates in the class absolutely spellbound with his message. Since then, I've heard Steve address industry leaders on dozens of other occasions, and spellbound is still the word to describe the talent that Steve has in articulating the state of the electric power industry and what it means for consumers. Steve is the Vice President of Business Development for Milsoft Utility Solutions. More importantly, Steve is known throughout this industry as the smart grid man. We are so delighted that he traveled all the way up here from Texas tonight to join us. Please join me in a Wright-Hennepin welcome for the smart grid man himself, all the way from Texas, Steve Collier.
But not far, Louisiana man. So rosin up that bowl for faded love and let's all dance. If you're gonna play in Texas, you gotta have a fiddle.
I forgot to wear my boots. And I really didn't understand that we were going to be showing pictures of our grandchildren. I had a grandson. I had my first grandson on December 30th, so I beat Mark by the calendar year in just a few days. I can't tell you how delighted I am to be here to talk to the owners of an electric distribution cooperative. I've been an employee of a cooperative. I've been a board member at an electric cooperative. I've worked in and around the cooperatives for years, and it ruined me for other business because this is a business in which it's all about the customers. This is not a presentation that I could give at just any electric cooperative in the country. I recently wrote in an article that Wright-Hennepin is really at the top of my list of favorite electric cooperatives in terms of using the latest and best technology for your benefit, the benefit of you folks who buy the electricity and own the business. Wright-Hennepin was formed in 1937. You celebrated your 75th anniversary last year. I understand it was a pretty big deal. Lots of cake got served. 1937 was an interesting year. The Hindenburg went down, Amelia Earhart disappeared, the first Social Security payments were made, the Golden Gate Bridge was opened, an engineering feat, still one of the 7 wonders of the modern world. And SPAM was launched from Austin, Minnesota. And I live in Austin, Texas, and we still have an annual SPAM festival. SPAM carving, SPAM ice cream, SPAM barbecue, SPAM art. 1937, why did this organization form? To bring to its members the single most important thing in technology since fire, and that was electricity. There's a quote in the National Rural Electric Cooperative Association's memorial book that reads like this: the greatest thing in the world is to have the love of God in your heart, but the next best thing is to have a light bulb in your house, to have electricity. Nothing has improved the quality of life and the productivity of business like the availability of affordable and reliable electric energy. How did that come about? Well, there was a fellow named Thomas Edison that formed the first electric utility back in the 1870s, had a little generating station that was 200 kilowatts in size. Some of you have larger generators on your farm than that, but that was the first electric utility, and it lit up arc lights up and down Broadway and Main in downtown New York City. That was a big deal, and it led to 100 years of the growth of an industry that was very stable, very predictable, and kind of not that hard to do well at, for the following reasons. First of all, we benefited from what are called economies of scale. One of Thomas' lieutenants, Sam Insel, understood that if we built these power plants a little bigger, each kilowatt hour would be cheaper. That's an economy of scale. If you're going to pour the slab, the second floor doesn't cost as much per square foot as it would if you just did the first floor. That's an economy of scale. And we had persistent economies of scale from 1879, from Pearl Street Station, all the way into the 1970s. So we just built bigger and bigger and bigger power plants. The second thing that we had going for us was exponential growth. People wanted electricity. They wanted it badly. They wanted more of it. We went from a few dozen kilowatt hours per person per year in this country to today's 14,000 kilowatt hours per person per year because electricity was so important to our quality of life and productivity of business. That made the business easy because in addition to the economies of scale, which meant that prices were declining, I could build a lot of stuff and grow into it. I could build a power plant, build it maybe a little larger than I needed, and I would have the growth in the future to grow into it. We had a thing called the Regulatory Compact, which said that each electric utility was a monopoly. That utility was the only supplier in their franchise service area, and if you bought electricity, you bought it from them. That really helps in financial planning. It really helps in business planning to know that you're the only supplier. It would be pretty easy, I think, you would agree with me, to go into the hamburger business if you could be the only hamburger supplier in these counties and you could not have anybody else compete with you, and you could have economies of scale. The more hamburgers you sell, the cheaper they are. And you get one additional benefit, cost plus pricing. Whatever it costs me to make the hamburgers, I take that plus a little profit, a little reasonable profit, not a big profit in the electric utility business, but a reasonable profit, and I divide it by the number of hamburgers that I sell, and that's the price you pay per hamburger. That would be a nice business to be in. But you and I both know the minute you open up a hamburger stand, I was talking to one of your board members who's been in the food and beverage business, you open up a restaurant, somebody else is going to compete with you. And they may not recover all the costs of their hamburgers. But we had that going for us, and here was the result. In 1879, when Thomas Edison was selling light bulb hours, he didn't actually sell kilowatt hours, we didn't start metering it for a while, a kilowatt hour cost about 50 cents. Now, that doesn't sound too bad, except that what could you buy in 1879 with 50 cents? There's not very much you can buy today with 50 cents, but back then, you could buy the equivalent of what you could buy in 1970 with $50. So in constant dollars, electricity was $50 a kilowatt hour. Are we getting close to that? No, we're not anywhere near that. $50 a kilowatt hour in nominal dollars, or in real dollars, adjusted for inflation and interest and all of those kinds of things. By 1970, it had fallen from nominal 50 cents a kilowatt hour to 5 cents. Then things began to reverse. And this is what we're going to be talking about and why Wright-Hennepin is so aggressive about chasing technology to help, because this business is fixing to change from a simple business where we build big power plants and deliver it over big transmission lines, and it goes one way down Wright-Hennepin's distribution lines to your homes and businesses. The business is about to change. Yogi Berra said it this way: the future ain't what it used to be. And it's not in the electric utility business. It has gotten harder ever since the 1970s, more complex, more difficult. It is astonishing to have the kind of financial performance that your cooperative has had this past year, when you know what was going on in this country in the economy, and you know what's going on with regulation. We don't have economies of scale anymore. Risk has overcome economies of scale. I can't build a great big huge coal plant or nuclear plant and be assured that I'm going to get it finished, that I'm going to get it online, that I'm going to be able to run it, that I'm going to be able to get fuel for it, and that people are going to put up with all the crap that I put in the water and the air and the earth, if you'll pardon my French, from that device. So we no longer can say, oh, if we just build another power plant and build it a little bigger, the kilowatt hours will be cheaper. From this point forward, kilowatt hours are going to be more expensive. They're going to be more expensive next year than they were this year, and that's going to continue for the foreseeable future. This exponential growth that we had, everybody wanted more and more and more electricity, has tapered off. Why is that? A couple of reasons. One is you can only use so much electricity. unless you have 6 daughters like I do, and then there's no limit. But the average human being can only use so much electricity, and we've pretty much got it made in this country. We use more electricity than all but 4 countries in the world. So how much more can you use? In addition, after the oil embargo of the 1970s, the 2 oil embargoes, 1973 and 1978, we began to get a little more efficient. Is that my mic making that noise? You gotta turn me off and turn this one on. Okay. I like switching mics in the middle. I have ADD, and this is cool. Can I have another one in a little bit? The exponential growth has also tapered off because of efficiency, and some of you have been participating in some of the energy efficiency programs that Wright-Hennepin has done, and we are getting more efficient at using electricity, and so topping out in the amount that we can use and using it a little more wisely, we're not going to see that kind of growth anymore. So we're actually going to see a decline in the long run in the number of kilowatt hours that an electric utility sells. So if my costs go up and the number of kilowatt hours I sell goes down, remember her little chart? You divide the costs by the number of kilowatt hours and you get the price. If the costs go up and the kilowatt hours go down, what happens to the price? The price goes up. And that's what we have to face us in the future for more reasons than one. And we don't have a monopoly anymore. We used to have a really nice monopoly. Nobody could come to your house and sell you electricity except us. Well, nowadays, folks can put solar cells on your rooftop, sell you wind machines. They can sell you generators to put in the basement. We're approaching a point in which you'll be able to go online and buy electricity for your house. The monopoly is over. It becomes a risky business now, just like the hamburger business that we were talking about, or a car dealership. Cost plus pricing. When you have no monopoly any longer, you don't have cost plus pricing because somebody's always willing to give you a discount. Cut the price. Offer it cheaper. May not be as good, may not be as reliable, may not give you a capital credit, but in the short run, it's cheaper. Then a whole bunch of other stuff. Brent Scowcroft said one time when he was in the presidential cabinet that no problem, however complex, cannot be made more complex by looking at it in a certain way. In this electric utility business, global warming, climate change, post 9/11 security of the grid, it has gotten really tricky. That's why you're seeing these men age before your very eyes. This is a very difficult business, and it's only going to get more difficult. So the business has changed from that simple business with a big generator and some transmission lines coming down to your distribution co-op to stuff just spotted around all over the place. Generators at your house, generators at businesses, batteries, the equivalent of houses wandering around. Anybody have an electric vehicle or a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle? One of those devices on fast charge is equal to the load of a house. And those are wandering around on the system. Now I'm telling you that Lance did not plan the distribution transformers in this co-op for house loads wandering around on the system. It has gotten very complex, and our only solution for that is technology. Now let me give you one more piece of both good and bad news. It's good news for the world. It's going to be troublesome for us. Where does everybody live in the world? They don't live in the United States. 4.5% of the people in the world live in the United States, which led George Shultz, when he was in Ronald Reagan's cabinet, to say, you know, it has occurred to me that 95% of the world are foreigners. They are. There's more of them than there are of us, and the interesting thing is how the energy divides out. We use 14,000 kilowatt hours per person per year in the United States of America. In China, they use less than 2,000. Are there more people or less people in China than in the United States? More. A little more or a lot more? A lot more. Do they want to use 14,000 kilowatt hours per person per year? Absolutely, for the same reason that we do. If they do, what happens to our business in this country? Remember what happened in the Olympics? You couldn't see the athletes when they were practicing before the Olympics because of the crud in the air from the coal-fired power plants. They turned the power plants off in China during the Olympics. Nobody died of choking during the Olympics, but the world price of oil and gas went up because China used so much oil and gas. We are now operating in a global economy in which now the pressure on price of everything goes up because the rest of the world wants as much as we do. Here's a really interesting slide. We have 4.5% of the people in the world, and we have roughly 1/4 of all the electricity usage in the world. 1/20 of the people and 1/4 of all the electricity. We use 1/2 of all the natural gas in the world. We use 1/4 of all the oil in the world. We account for 1/4 of all the pollution in the world, the crud that we put in the air, the water, and the ground. Now, as the rest of the world catches up, we are no longer local. We are in a global economy, and it's going to push prices up and the availability of things down. And how do we solve that problem? It gets even worse. The United States Department of Energy issued a report a couple of 3 years ago that said basically the grid as we know it today is becoming rapidly obsolete simply because of the things that we mentioned. No more economies of scale. No more cost plus pricing. We haven't been building power plants in this country because risk has overcome the economies of scale. So what have we done? Mark mentioned earlier the investor-owned utilities, which account for roughly 80% of all the kilowatt-hour sales in the country. There are only 250 of them, but they're big. There's 860 of us, co-ops, and there's 2,000 city-owned electric utilities, but the IOUs pretty much control the business. Their solution to this problem was, we'll make this your problem. You guys are the problem. You're using too much electricity and you're using it at the wrong time. So we want you to quit doing that. My friend Brewster McCracken in Austin talks about the secret plan to kill what we call the smart grid, the solution to this grid problem. Part one, we're going to try to convince you to not use electricity when you want it. Stick Granny in the basement, in a sweater, in the dark, so that we can keep your prices down. Part two, if you don't do that, your power bill is going to double and triple and quadruple, and you won't be able to afford electricity. Now, this country was based on the ready availability of electricity so that we could use it anytime we wanted for whatever we wanted. How do you think that's going to work out? How do you think customers feel about that? They feel like this fellow, plus the worry that my smart meter might burst into flames, which we've had occur around the country a little bit. Not here. It's not a problem. Your guys are monitoring that. But we can't make this your problem. We've got to bring you the solution. And how do we solve it? The way we solve it is to take advantage of something that's as big and wonderful as electricity was in the late 1800s. We call it the internet, but it's so much more than that. It's electronic communications. How many of you have got a cell phone? How many of you have 2 cell phones? I can't count the number of iPads and cell phones and stuff in my house. You know, every time I look at one of my daughters, they've got a different device. And I know that I paid for it, but I don't remember it. And I'm still paying for it. And I hear about that at the end of the month. Information technology, which lets us monitor and analyze and control, to know when a PHEV is charging up at your house, to know when the price of electricity is the highest, and we can tell you that, and if you choose, if you want to save some money, you can. If you choose not to, you don't have to. Hopefully we can put a black box in your house and you don't even have to think about it. You don't have to sit outside and watch the meter like that poor fellow and worry about what your power bill is going to be. We can use the technology to solve that problem. My friend Bob Metcalf, who was the inventor of the modem, some of you remember computer modems where you would dial up a number and then you'd stick the phone in the computer modem so you could communicate. He invented the modem when was the CEO of 3Com for a number of years. He said, we spent the last 60-something years delivering reliable, quality information, and it has resulted in the internet, the interconnection, a network of computers. For the next 60 years, probably much sooner than that, in my opinion, we're going to be developing the same kind of thing to deliver reliable electricity, to the point that some folks think that we will ultimately be able to email electricity in the same way that we email information. Bob Metcalf calls it the internet, the energy network. And what is that? It is doing exactly what Wright-Hennepin is doing in the face of all this complexity and challenge that makes the business so different than it was in the last 75 years. That is finding the technology that helps you folks know what you're using, use it for the stuff you want to use it for, and solve the problems if your power bill is too high, or you would like to use less, or you would like to use green energy instead of coal-fired energy or nuclear-fired energy, giving you the opportunity to do that. Wright-Hennepin has looked into wind generation for you. At the current price of electricity, it doesn't make a lot of sense because the wind doesn't blow enough. They're looking at solar energy for you. That one makes a lot more sense. And you have a community solar, a solar garden underway, so that any of you that want electricity not only can subscribe to that, but we can know that you subscribe to it and credit it to your bill. How? With information technology, with electronics, with software, with technology. We're going to provide you with smart power, the combination of the best available information and electronics technologies with the same old kilowatt hours you've always been using, so that your price, if it goes up slower than anybody else's, and you can do something about it. Your reliability continues to increase, not decrease. And we can insulate you from some of the vagaries of a world that wants to use hundreds of times more energy than it's using today. I'm thrilled to death to be able to talk to you about Wright-Hennepin. I don't know of an electric co-op that is more aggressive and yet more judicious in chasing the latest and best technology to make sure you guys are getting the best bargain for your bucks and the best electricity to keep that light bulb on in your home. Thank you very much.